I don't know.
Nah, we can't hear him right now. All right, we're live, guys. Welcome. Episode number 44, Before the Train Wreck. We're joined today by special guest Conk. How you doing, Corey?
No, I'm doing good. I'm here. I'm alive. Just had a long ass hike with my dog, hoping he'll be tired and sleep throughout this broadcast and not bark and shake the house.
Yeah, he'll be all right if he does. Of course, joined by my partner in crime, Dr. Sean T. Smith. How you doing, Sean?
Good. How you guys doing?
Doing great. So Corey's a regular contributor. You see him in the chat often, and he'll hop in from time to time, just either add or to ask a question during these sessions. We've done 44 now, and today we wanted to hop into Rites of Passage. You want to give him a little bit of background around who Conk is and how you came about this idea?
Oh yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to do my whole
Frame it a
life
bit.
history now, but yeah, I would say. Well, first of all, I got into like the red pilly manosphere about a year and a half ago, off of a bad relationship, like most people do. So I read the Rational Mail. I binged all the YouTube videos, and then I eventually started. I would say actually intentionally trying to contribute and help out around December last year. So just over a year of doing that. And it's gone pretty well. Got to meet a lot of you guys, got to help a lot of people. I get I get to actually get quite a few amount of emails where I answer stuff for free. So so far it's been good. But how I came about Rites of Passage, the topic is I think we talked about this before at one of the previous Before the Train Wrecks, where I jumped in for a couple minutes. But my mom was married 5 times to 3 people, which is pretty entertaining. She married my dad twice, and then my stepdad, and then a stepdad. But I was already 17 at the time, so I didn't care. And then she divorced and remarried my first stepdad. So and that all happened before I graduated high school. So I got a whole lot of that fatherlessness, times 5.
Okay.
Yeah. And so one of the things I've noticed is like when you're going through all those phases and you don't have that strong male role model, like you kind of are in that kid mentality or in your mother's frame, to put it into red pill terms. You're always in your mother's frame until something takes you out of it, right? And throughout all of history, it's usually some kind of male or cultural event that had that happen, but we don't have that nowadays, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it kind of, you either do it intentionally or sometime life is going to slap you in the face and you're going to have to learn the hard way, which I think what happened to me was when I turned 20, I joined an internship for an Assemblies of God church. I don't know if you guys know about Assemblies of God, but they're the pretty hyper, speaking in tongues, yelling, hollering, 4-hour church services of people yelling and gospel songs of wherever the Spirit leads.
You got pretty deeply involved in the church too. Like I think you said you're a pastor at one point, or you're
yeah. I was associate youth pastor because my brother was the youth pastor of a Baptist church. Then I became one of the background assistant youth pastors at this Assemblies of God church, but it was an internship. So I actually did everything. I led the children's ministry, the homeless ministry, and then I assisted with the actual sermons and the youth group organization. And then from there, I did a lot of Christian residential treatment, which was a very interesting topic as well. And so I've been plugged into church culture and been behind the scenes ever since I was 17 or 18. I've been working in churches or ministry. And actually, for quite a few of those years, I actually considered myself atheist. So that's kind of funny, too.
What is Christian residential treatment? Is like substance abuse treatment?
It was a youth behavioral health inpatient.
Okay.
But they treated it like a boarding school, but you also had assigned counselors and therapists and caseworkers on top of the boarding school traditional, go to school these times and you eat there and live there and sleep there. Mm-hmm. But it was centered around treatment for behavioral mental health, substance abuse.
Were you an atheist as you were going through the youth pastor stuff, or is it just something that you concluded yourself as you started to kind of dive down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, I grew up in a very Southern Baptist-y, it's a sin if women wear pants type of churches is how I grew up.
I agree.
Until
you guys are starting to sound like Roosh.
Oh man, yeah, I got to buy that 300,000-mile Toyota, right?
Yeah.
That comes with it. I don't know if you guys saw that video, but it was pretty funny.
And now you're working as a social worker, right?
Yeah, right now I do substance abuse casework and integrated health specialist type stuff. It's kind of like case manager, counselor, but I'm outpatient and I drive around. So my car is my office, and I drive around the city, and I go to people therapy to their house.
Got it.
It's like DoorDash therapy.
Got it. All right. And I know that we got a quick article that Sean wants to dive into before we really get into this Rites of Passage thing. I'm going to post Conk's YouTube channel in the live chat right now. So if you want to check it out, he's just kind of getting started. Give him a sub. He's got one good video there on meat and milk. I won't explain it, but you should check it out after. Let me grab that article that you gave me, Sean, and pop it up on the screen, because there was another piece this week about how toxic or on toxic masculinity. Women don't know the progress on toxic masculinity. Okay.
All right. So this is from
this article about.
So you got to take it for what it is. This is the title of the article is "Woman Didn't Know Progress on Toxic Masculinity Would Turn Boyfriend into Such a Weepy Little Pansy." I'll just read you the first sentence here. It's from Appleton, Wisconsin. Expressing disbelief at her romantic partner's dramatic behavioral shift, local woman Emily Kittleson, 30, told reporters Friday that she had not expected her boyfriend's attempts to recognize and curtail toxic masculinity would eventually turn him into a weepy little pansy. And it goes on from there.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite insightful on the Onion's part.
Yeah, why wouldn't it make you a weepy little pansy when you give up your masculinity?
And I was thinking about Conk. I was thinking, since he's sort of running the show here tonight, maybe there should be some sort of before the train wreck rite of passage for him. Like maybe he should have to go field dress a mule deer or something while we wait here, and he'll come back and let us know how it goes.
Oh yeah, I'm down to do that. I've never been hunting yet. I did a lot of fishing, but I've never done hunting. So I can gut a fish. I haven't had to gut a mammal yet.
Yeah, it's a totally different ball game. I've taken the hunting course, and they show you how to gut a deer in it and deal with stuff like that. It's
I'm down to try. I hear birds are pretty annoying as hell to depuluck and all of that.
Yeah, that can get pretty messy. So is that a rite of passage for men? I mean, going out on a hunt and killing your first animal. Like, what are we talking about here when it comes to rites of passage for men? Because it seems like we almost have a complete absent amount of men in the world today, and anybody that behaves like a man is deemed as toxic, as we just saw in that article. I mean, your toxic masculinity is like infringing on my space. Take a step back, boy, sort of thing. But like for a long period of time, men have always had to go through that rite of passage, where they, in certain religions, it's what do they do in the Jewish religion? They
have the bar mitzvah.
Yeah, bar mitzvah and the bat mitzvah, and there's other ones where, like in certain tribes, you got to get tattooed, you got to do this, you got to go on a hunt, you got to go and do this or that. Or the other. Like there's all these things that they've forced boys to do to become men, and we don't really have that anymore. Now now we see parents bubble wrapping the crap out of their kids and turning them into these little weepy little pansies, as this woman would have said. But yeah, like, where do you want to kick off on this one?
I would just say how I define it and how I've studied it, because like I said before, like myself, I didn't have a great, male role model in my life. And so I could see that looking back in my history of like all of the sections and timelines of what year by year, month by month, when I was thinking like a kid, and then when that switched to thinking like an adult or like a man specifically. And so when I think of rites of passage, I think of that transitional period between thinking like a boy and thinking like a man, right? And I think because we have fatherlessness, is so rampant right now, the single parent almost crisis, if you want to call it that, is we're having a lot of men that are still boys, even if their ages are in the 20s and 30s, right? Because in my time, I've worked with, I don't know, probably close to 1,000 youth out of different locations and different years and all of that kind of stuff. I'd say I've probably individually met about 1,000 different individual teenagers, and I've met some 16-year-old kids that I would consider a man, and I've met like 50 and 60-year-old employees that I would still consider a boy, right? And so I think that maturity in that switch isn't necessarily based on age, right? There's something there that it's not just given to you. And I think that's obviously contrary to, you know, how girls become women is literally a biological indicator, right? Almost all of the rites of passage you see for women is like a quinceañera or a sweet 16 or something like that. And it's literally, ta-da, you've come of age, right?
Well, isn't the first rite of passage for a woman like when she has her first period, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the conversation comes up, well, now you're a woman.
Yeah. And, you know, and that's something that's, you know, that's given just based on time. And that's not a factor when it comes to men. It's something you usually have to earn or pass, right? Because a lot of them involve tests or trials. And looking through all the research, and I've been researching a lot of different cultures and a lot of different ways they do it. And one of the conclusions and the underlining messages of all of them is that they're all test competency is essentially the root of it all. Because when you switch from being a consumer and you become a provider, and not necessarily that, oh, you're the beta bucks, right? Giving people stuff, but it's, you're no longer taking from society. You're now giving to society. You're going from consuming to surplus, right?
Yeah.
And I actually have a graph of that I shared with you guys before.
Yeah, throw that up.
Yeah, it's a really good graph. You should put that up if we can.
All right, let me see if I can share that up.
While you're doing that, I want to read this little quote from a guy named Roy Baumeister. I talk about him quite a bit because he's a really cool guy. He's written some great stuff on this topic. A lot of stuff having to do with men and masculinity. And this is from a book called Is There Anything Good About Men? He wrote this a few years ago before the APA guidelines and all that came out. And a little quick quote here. He says, many cultures are quite explicit about a boy needing to prove himself before he can call himself a man. In some times and places, young men must kill a large animal, whether it's a dangerous predator or a desired source of meat to provide for the group. In others, boys must undergo ceremonies marked by painful physical tests before they can be respected as men.
Yeah, I think that fits right in line. And I think that's one of those truths. And it's kind of like reading The Rational Male or other like red pill books. It's one of those things you just kind of innately know in the back of your mind. But then once someone reads it, you go, okay, that's starting to connect dots. You know what I mean? It's kind of those hidden underbearing like male truths that have never been spoken before, but you've kind of already believed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that kind of goes into that like burden of performance and stuff. But
what are we looking at here when it comes to produce versus consume? Can you just go a little bit or just minimize the browser zoom a tiny bit just so we can get the whole screen there?
Yeah, I tried to figure out how to do that. I don't know if it's working.
What are you using, Chrome or?
It's just open in one of my tabs. I tried to copy paste it over, but
okay.
Somebody's not doing it. But
that's fine.
This is essentially the gist of it is, so this is a graph of research I found on a video going off of Rites of Passage and Times.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what we're looking at is the men and women, and it's the net daily calories. So each number on the graph is times 1,000. So, you know, you have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 surplus to negative 1,000, 2,000, you know, consuming. Mm-hmm. That's basically who's contributing to the tribe based on men and women and based on age, right? So as you can see,
saying here, right up until about 20, men are consuming more than they are providing. That's what the red means, right? Is you're consuming and providing.
And you'll see like it peaks, you know, when they're around 10, and then it actually starts going up around, you know, 12, 14 years. Mm-hmm. They're already starting to provide. You know, they're obviously, if you ever met a 14-year-old boy or your 14-year-old self, you weren't eating less, right? No one there is eating less. 14-year-old guy is eating less when they're 14. So they're still eating, but that's when they're starting to provide and they're starting to learn. And that's essentially tribal school, as you would, right? It's where they're learning their functions and their needs to survive in the world. And then eventually they become the surplus users, you know, that rocket all the way up to post 3,000 calorie surplus versus eaten, right? And then if you look at the females, they're consumers all the way up until they're near 50. And then you have that switch into they are providing more than that. And it's always, and that in itself is only 400 calorie surplus.
What is the shift that happens? Or it looks like it's around 45 in the graph. So what's the shift around 45 that it's suggesting happens where women all of a sudden contribute more than they consume?
I would say that's right around the good old fashioned, what's that called?
It's like menopause.
Menopause. The PMS menopause phase is when you're no longer creating kids and you're no longer supervising the kids, and that's when you're kind of switching from that mom to grandma role, right? You know, in most tribal places, you know, we're not having kids at 35. We're having kids at, you know, 15, 18, 20 if you go back really far, and you're having multiple kids. So by the time you're 40, you're most likely a grandma, right?
Well, unless you're Jennifer Lopez and you're going to tell A-Rod you're going to have a kid at 50.
Oh, yeah.
You know, go medical science in North America.
Oh, yeah. But, man, yeah, society has definitely skewed that in 8,000 ways more.
So that's pretty interesting, because I've come across some articles lately, and names are escaping me, so forgive me, but some people are starting to ask the question, why would we even have menopause as a species? What's the point of women getting to their late 40s and they're no longer able to produce? And the thinking is that grandmothers actually increase the fitness and the survivability of their grandchildren. So just the fact that you enter this new stage of life where you become this different figure in the family and in the community that is more of a provider. That's kind of interesting to see that showing up on this chart, or something similar showing up on this chart.
Yeah. The grandma's role is no longer watch the kids, it's watch the community, right? And so that's when you're transitioning, because by that time her kids are adults and they're having their own kids. So the grandma is more of a generational thing instead of the nuclear family mom watching her kids, right? And so that's where you're getting that provision, is that she's watching lots of people and not just her and her own, you know?
So what are you saying here, Conk, that men produce more than women? Are you a sexist? Is this what you're driving at right now?
I think this is the most physical representation of the burden of performance I've ever seen. Right? Like, look at how ridiculous this curve is compared to all others. You know.
Got it.
Do you recall where you found this, Conk?
I was trying to find it for so long. I've had this on my computer for a year. Okay. And I know I screenshotted it off of a presentation about evolutionary biology and tribes.
I've seen it somewhere on some Evo Psych literature before.
Yeah. And I know I specifically screenshotted it off a presentation, and I, for the life of me, cannot find that presentation. And I was striving to find it all week. But what I really want to focus on, especially with the rites of passage, is that switch, that 10 to 20, where you switch from consumer to creator, right? Consumer to surplus. And I think that's the biggest deal there. All right, we can buzz that off.
Okay.
Yeah. And so to me, there's obviously something there. And I think there's been a lot of literature written about it, trying to figure that out, you know, things like Iron John, or all those types of fables, or all of the old archetypes. All of those are a lot about journeys through a man's life, right? And I think that's the Western, to me, that's just kind of the Western culture trying to re-grab what I feel like a lot of men already innately knew before we have this whole societal overlay, you know, that we didn't always have.
So I might be jumping in too early with this question, but what do you see as the modern Western version of rites of passage for men?
We don't have any. As far as I know, it's become, before it was a cultural event. It wasn't just you and your dad, though that was most of the case. It was like, and your uncles and your grandparents and your tribe, like everybody came in. And they used to do most cultures, some of them did them individual one at a time, but most cultures, they would do a stable of kids at a time. So like every 3 years, they'll take all the kids age 10 to 13, and you're all going to go do trials, and you're all going to do rites of passage. And then they'll wait 3 years and do it again, or 5 years, or 10 years. And they'll just grab a whole group of boys in between those ages, and they would all do it together as like a very formal ceremony that, okay, you're no longer a kid, you know, sucking on mama's teat. Now you're expected to go hunt and provide like everyone else.
Did we ever have a time in recent history where it was incorporated into common Western culture? I don't know, whether through function of family or school or religion.
I would say the closest we got is either the military or farming families would be the closest, I think, representation. But I mean, that's still on the individual level. And we still can probably see a lot of examples of people who went to the military and still never really grew up. You know what I mean? So a lot of guys go into the military to find their masculinity and try to find their self. And not all of them do that.
Well, there's places in the world still where there's mandatory military service, right? Like that
Yeah.
would be a rite of passage in those sorts of environments.
Possibly, yeah. I think that to me the root is the intention behind it. Like how I would consider my rite of passage, where I started going from adult to kid thinking, that wasn't set up for me. That's something I had to learn the hard way, right? It was kind of the school of hard knocks for me. Of me realizing, oh crap, I'm not a kid anymore. I got adult stuff. I'm an adult now. I'm able to be competent. I need to start taking some authority and responsibility in my life and others.
So what are the differences between child and adult thinking for men?
I think it goes back to, and this is the one we'll probably get a lot of feminists yelling at, but I think it's that separation of women and children, right? The man is the separated from the individual, because most things we apply to women, we also apply to children and vice versa. And men are usually the outlier of that group of three, right?
So the things that we apply between women and children are like women and children first on the Titanic, right? You get
exactly. First. And it was specifically women first, then children, then men. They actually, that's been the order throughout history, because women can just make more kids. Right?
What was that joke that Chris Rock did? Only women, children, and dogs are loved unconditionally. Men are only loved under the condition that they provide something. Exactly.
Yeah, it all comes back to the burden of performance. If you're not performing, you're not a man, right? And that's in the eyes of a lot of people. And honestly, I think it's at least half right. You know what I mean?
No, it's not wrong. You're right. I mean, like women and children basically get the same level of dismissal and excuse and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, they're treated the same in society.
Classes,
they're definitely protected
right?
The same way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's obviously evolutionary merit for that versus men being more disposable and more based on performance.
Yeah, men have always been more disposable.
Yeah. And so that's been always one of my things. And you see that a lot of like some guys in this sphere, especially like the incel black pill side, are like mad that they have the burden of performance. But
yeah, why do you think that is? Is it like a surprise to them that they've actually got to do something worthwhile?
I think it's more of a sore loser thing. Like, oh, I don't want to play if it's not by my rules, or I'm going to be the cool kid and not play the game because I know I'm going to lose, sort of mentality.
So what is it, then, a hissy fit, you think?
Possibly, yeah.
How do you see the anger showing up? Like, what words do they use?
Ooh, a lot that I don't want to say to keep the channel monetized, but
okay.
Well, you can kind of water it down a little bit. I mean, I've seen a lot of the same behavior with some of the guys that don't want to take on the burden of performance as toxic feminists, where they point and sputter at everybody else and they don't want to take ownership for things. And, they're always playing the victim card, right? Like, poor me, I'm such a victim. But you don't get to play the victim card as a guy. I mean, for men, you have to create value in your life. You have to do something of some significance. You just can't be a guy and show up and go, I'm a man, I have a penis, give me everything I've asked for, right?
Yeah.
You don't have that luxury as a guy. You've got to earn it.
Exactly. And to me, I would almost relate it to like poker, in that poker, everybody's dealt a random hand, but in every tournament, you always see the same people at the final table, right? It's not the card you're dealt, it's how you're playing the game, right? And some people are just saying, oh, I got a 2 and a 7. I quit all of it. This is stupid, right? You guys are all suckers. I'm the real cool guy for not playing. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you put your work in, and you learn your game, you learn your trade, that's what it is. Yes, agency is hard.
It is, yeah. Takes work.
Responsibility is good and bad.
It's
repercussions.
It ties into mastery, and there's like different things that guys can do to achieve some rite of passage. I mean, I'll give you a couple examples to kind of like do a little bit of storytelling here, because I know we're going to weave in and out of this topic here and there. But I mean, I remember the first time I was required to pay rent. I mean, I was a teenager still in school, and I was earning money, and my dad was in England, and my mom was basically taking care of the home, and they were planning on selling the house and moving over there and moving the family over there, and I was paying rent. I don't know, I was like 14, 15 years old or something like that. That felt like a rite of passage, because none of my friends paid rent. Like, I grew up in a pretty wealthy area of town. Like, one of my best friends, his parents bought him a 1970 Mustang, and he got to drive his dad's Jag convertible whenever he wanted the keys to it, sort of thing, right? And here I was working my ass off paying rent, so that felt like a rite of passage. I remember getting my first motorcycle, felt like a rite of passage. Like, that was a rite from the sense of like freedom and strength and authority and masculinity, because it's like, I got a small part of my book, talking about why I think every guy should own a motorcycle. Because to me, it felt like, and I don't, have a time machine that I can go back 300 years and see what it's like to get your first horse sort of thing. But I would imagine that it would have been like that rite of passage where a boy would earn his first horse, right? And be able to have the ability to maneuver and travel great distances at length without much effort. Same sort of thing happens when you have a motorcycle. You can basically go and do whatever you want as long as it's not snowing on you.
How old were you when you got that bike?
Oh man, I was stoked. I think I was 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was about 17, I think. And yeah, that first feeling I think I had a bike before I had a car. I had a car first. But that first feeling you get when you are actually comfortable on the bike for the first time, you've been riding it a little bit, and then you have some place to go on that bike. And so you leave your house and you go to that place on this bike that you bought. It is a feeling that, like, I will never forget that feeling the first time that happened to me.
Yeah, it's like no other. I put tens of thousands of miles on two wheels. I mean, I had 4 different motorcycles. I stopped riding when I was 30. I'm not going to say stop riding, but I took a sabbatical. I mean, I'll probably get a bike again at some point, but I rode for a good long period of time. And at one point it was pretty much my only means of transportation. And I got to tell you, man, there's nothing more freeing than being able to just hop over a living, breathing, and I call it a living, breathing machine because that's really what it is. I mean, it's an internal combustion engine that sucks in air, blows it up, and shoots it out a pipe and makes all kinds of wicked sounds. And it's freedom, strength, and masculinity all wrapped. And chicks dug it, man. I mean, there was, dollar for dollar, there was nothing that would get a woman interested in you more than owning a motorcycle. You'd show up at a party, and all the women wanted to go for a ride, right? To me, that was a great rite of passage, as a young man. And they're not very expensive. They're very
expensive. It's not like you're sitting in a car separated by a firewall between you and the engine. You're right there with the metal coming to life, and you're sitting
in a metal coffin with airbags all the way around you, and automatic braking systems, and all these things. And a bike, you just don't have that. Like, you have to have your head on a swivel. You have to be alert. It's almost like you're out. I mean, this is going to sound weird, but it's almost like you're out in the wild and you're looking for mountain lions and bears and shit to fuck you up, because potentially everything out there could hit you and kill you.
Yeah, and you feel alive in those moments.
It's alive. Funny because the motorcycle really is just the more modern archetype of the cowboy on his horse. Right? It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. A car is, even though we talk about horsepower for cars too, like, it's not the same thing.
No, cars don't even come close to, like, I got my driver's license before I got a motorcycle license, and 2 years later I got the bike license, and a car was just like, okay, rather than sitting in this seat, now I'm sitting in this seat and I have the steering wheel. A motorcycle requires a different rite of passage because you have to learn an entirely new set of skills, which include balance too now, right?
All right, so Rich, so rites of passage for you: paying rent early, riding your bike, your motorcycle, not your bike. What else?
For men, getting laid for the first time, moving out of your house. There's lots of things I think that guys experience as a rite of passage, towards their manhood. I mean, of course, losing your virginity as a man, I think, is a rite of passage, right? I mean, you're not truly, like, amongst your peers, amongst your friends, you don't want to be the virgin in the group. You want to be the guy that's like, yeah, I got some sort of thing, right? I think that's another rite of passage too that men experience. And there's a lot of guys today. I mean, there's a lot of stats that we've seen in the last year or so, like year and a half, where there's a lot of men today that don't have sex. They're basically incels. They don't participate in the sexual marketplace.
Yes,
numbers are higher than ever too, right?
Corey, what do you make of that? That's a weird phenomenon for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah, well, I mean, just tying the three together, Rich is talking about the getting your own place, paying your own rent, getting your own vehicle that you want and not just the hand-me-down, right? And then also getting your first woman, getting your first lay. All of those all go into that underlying principle of competence.
What about violence?
Right?
What about violence? What about your first fight?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I want to do a whole show separate on violence. I know we talked about it a little bit behind the scenes, but I think violence needs its own show. But
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
that's a passion project of mine.
Yeah, I'm down for that too.
Yeah, well,
Violence is
Healthy amounts of violence in the man's life.
yeah,
I
you
like
gotta
what
have
Rule Zero
violence as a
Dad said,
man,
though.
right? Like you got like we've always had these feats of strength as a man, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if it's like physical combat as in violence, but we've always tried to express ourselves as man, as physical. Like we operate in a physical world. Like even as a kid, I remember when you'd put the hockey card on your spokes on your banana seat bike and rip down the street. You wanted to make more noise than your buddy's bike just because you had a bigger hockey card or you set it up a different way from his bike, sort of thing. I mean, we've always tried to compete with one another. And I think, your first fight's another good point that Rule Zero Dad just made there.
Yeah, you want to hear about my first fight?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh yeah, do it.
All right. Because I had not thought about this. I've been thinking about this all day, like my personal rites of passage and how I got to thinking more like a provider rather than a consumer. But my first fight didn't even cross my mind. And now that Rule Zero Dad pointed out, it's so obvious. That was a huge rite of passage for me. It was in 7th grade, and I had just gone to this new school because here in the States, you go from 1 through 6, you're in one school, and then you go to middle school. At least you did back then, 7, 8, 9, and then you go to high school after that. So I had gone to this new school. And it was kind of known for having fights and so forth. And so I was walking in and I was a little scared, and everybody was nervous because they were talking about it like you're going into Attica State Prison or something, right? And there's going to be fights everywhere. So I had always been a little bit bullied as a kid because I had bad eyes and stuff. And so I could kind of joke my way through some of it, but I still got bullied quite a bit. So when I went into this new school, I don't think I was thinking clearly, but I had it in my head that I was going to have a different experience. And meanwhile, my father had just recently bought this bar. And so I was spending my nights and weekends in this bar and surrounded by a very different kind of energy, sort of rowdy, masculine energy, and a lot going on, a lot of adult themes. And so there was this kid at this new junior high school named Julian Maldonado. And Julian, if you're out there, hey, get on you, man. Taught me a lesson. But I decided for whatever reason that Julian Maldonado, being the Golden Gloves champ at the school and 1 grade ahead of me and just a general badass that everyone was afraid of, for whatever stupid reason, I decided I was going to pick a fight with Julian Maldonado. So I started, poking at him and calling him names and so forth. And he caught me outside of gym class one time, and I said, all right, let's do that. And he's all right, let's do this. And whatever we said, young kids will puff up and circle each other and so forth. Mm-hmm. And he punched me one time, and I just dropped like a sack, like a lead balloon. I went down so fast, and that was it. But here's the thing. After that moment, I wasn't scared of anybody ever again. And because I wasn't scared of anybody ever again, nobody ever messed with me again, because I was the kid that fought Julian Maldonado, and I knew it and everybody knew it. And there was a huge shift in my thinking where, like, I was not walking through the world scared anymore. Like, Julian Maldonado hit me. Wasn't that bad. I think I can handle stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I got a folder here on my
Nice.
Facebook. I just dug up this is my second motorcycle. So this is an example of a rite of passage, right? I was probably about 19 here, sporting the Oakley blades. There's no leaves on the trees behind me. I think this is around April. I have no idea why I'm not wearing a shirt, but fuck it. You're on a motorcycle. You got to look like Tom Cruise, right? And, that was a thing. Like, that was a great time for me. Like, that was an amazing experience to be able to have done the work, made some money. I think I paid $5,500 for that bike, but, to me, that was, I bought my first motor transportation, 300 years ago. Would have been a kid buying his first horse probably. But that was a significant moment in my life, right? It's, the first fight, the first bike, motor transportation, first time you get laid. All of those things, for guys are certainly, oh man, I got a whole bunch here in the folder. You want to see my, here, I'll show you one more just for shits and giggles. There's my IROC Z Italian, my buddies used to make fun of me. They'd say, you got the Italian retard out cruising, or what was the other one they used for it? I reek of cologne, was the other one. But hey, man, for me, that was a rite of passage. Like, that was a cool car, right? It was awesome.
Oh yeah.
So how did your thinking shift when you got the IROC?
Yeah, 1988 IROC, Rule Zero Dad knows exactly. My thinking changed because I went from driving a shitty Chevette, like I had a $500 Chevette along with a motorcycle at the same time. And it's like, I went from a flimsy toy to something that had, like a 5-liter V8 in it, right? That made all kinds of cool sounds that, it was just awesome, right? There's lots of fond memories of those rites of passage that I have from back in those times that I think men need to experience as they mature and become, men, as they transition from boys to men, right? I remember everybody was telling me, "Oh, don't get that car. You're going to kill yourself. Everybody's killing themselves in those cars and they're going off the road and blah, blah, blah." And that just made me want it more. I'm like, danger? Give me that. I want more of that. Sign me up for more of that danger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Motorcycles weren't a problem for my parents, but that car for some reason was a problem because people were dying in those cars.
But not motorcycles.
But not motorcycles. I mean, my mom's dad
those
grew
are
up in
key rights.
Greece and Cyprus and Egypt, and he rode motorcycles everywhere. So that wasn't a problem for her. But apparently, a car like that scared the crap out of her because people were dying in them. I don't know where that came from. But
Man, that's some solipsism right there. Solipsistic thinking. Oh, I saw somebody on a motorcycle and they didn't die, so therefore it's okay, right? I think that's interesting. But I think the pattern under all this, and to get a little more academic, I guess, like talking about rent or fistfights and all of those things, there's really like anytime you look up academia on any rites of passage, they always talk about three base things that always happen. It's some type of separation or isolation is the first step. And then there's some kind of transforming of thinking or some type of exposure they have to deal with. And then the third part is reintegrating with that new mindset or that new social role, right? And I think, honestly, all those apply to everything we're talking about, right? There's some kind of separation, isolation of putting yourself out there, out of your comfort zone, right? Even though you might not physically be in a new location, like all of those locations, you're not in your comfort zone, right? Nobody was, having fun outside of gym class about to get punched in the face. That wasn't your normal every day, right? But you went there and you got exposure to the real world. It's like taking your training wheels off, right? In the most extreme sense. And it's like once you do that and you essentially are just testing for competency, and then there's always some kind of psychological change that happens. And then once you reintegrate into your old comfortable places, you have a new social role and you have a new outlook on life, right?
What's an example of the psychological change?
I would say, at least for me, and I mean, you kind of explained it yourself when you're talking about the fight. It's like, wow, you had your eyes open that the world isn't as scary as I thought. If this is a punch in the face, like, life's pretty effing easy, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing that much scary if I'm supposed to be scared of a punch, And it's that transformative thinking where you have like something of your comfortable world flipped upside down, right? And like almost using it as those graphs we were talking about, like the bars flipped upside down.
Well,
like,
speaking of fights, now that I think about it, like I think I had my first fight in elementary school around grade 4 or 5. Like Sean, I got picked on a lot. I had scars and I was a goofy kid, apparently because of it. And some kid was picking on me and I grabbed his hand and he started swinging. I just broke his hand and his fingers. He had to come to school with a cast the next day. But I just remember that like that moment, by standing up for myself, by putting my foot down and demonstrating that I wasn't going to let this kid or these kids walk all over me, everybody just backed off. They just kind of left me alone. They didn't want to bother you. And it seems like, getting into some kind of physical confrontation is a must. And you can't do that these days, right? Like they don't even let kids fight anymore. Like I remember when I was a kid in the schoolyard, the teachers would let you fight it out a little bit. It was like a hockey game. They let you fight it out a little bit and then they break it up and just say, you go to this corner, you go to that corner. Even if you just like flick a booger at another kid today, you're both in the principal's office and they're calling the parents.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And like,
they want to bubble wrap them.
Yeah. Yeah. Ever since I would say the Industrial Revolution is really when you started seeing this lack of fatherlessness. Not that it's single parents, but the lack of father involved in the son's growth.
Yeah.
Right. When you're clocking into that 9-to-5 job, you're not at home, A, to watch the kid and be a role model for him, but also B, your kid's not there to watch you work. Right. And that was such a pivotal moment when I was looking through all these research that they're really hammering on is like you don't just go, you're not playing video games until you're 12 or 13. You go, okay, go survive in the woods for a week. Right. Mm-hmm. There was always some type of preparation where the son learned from the father, from the male leader, how to do the job, and then they got tested, right?
So let me ask you this question. Can a boy growing up in a single parent home with a single mom experience rites of passage through the mother?
No. A woman can never teach a boy how to be a man. I don't think that's impossible. And I'm pretty sure I'll get a lot of crap for it, but I mean, that's kind of the way it is, right? We like, well, how good if we would we make a talk about how to give birth or how to maintain your periods, right? The three of us, like, sure, we can read some books on it, but we're not going to know that. We don't have that experience of that to pass down, right? Likewise, there's no way a mother, even if she's been around, positive male role models her whole life, she's never going to teach a boy how to be a man. It's not in her experience.
So what's the next best thing? Like some other masculine role model, like the grandfather or uncle or something?
Yeah, hopefully. Or, I mean, for me, myself, I kind of did it by myself on accident where I joined an internship with that Assemblies of God, crazy speaking in tongue church. But I lived in their storage units for a year, which sounds pretty crazy. But
units?
They had a storage shed that they turned into apartments.
Yeah.
What turned into apartments is they put up a divider wall. So now that there's 3 rooms, and we literally had shower curtains as doors. So, and the whole thing was filled with like brown recluses and barn spiders, and like there was no heating system. So at night it was 30 degrees in there, and you had to go to bed in a sweater and a hoodie and 3 blankets to survive the night.
Did you ever go into Boy Scouts or anything like that?
Oh no. I essentially got forced into survival skills living in a barn. So
okay. What about you, Sean? Did you ever do any kind of Boy Scout stuff?
No, we were a family that just worked. That's what we did.
Yeah, because I did that, and that at that time, and I don't know what it's like today. I think they've gone soft. From what I heard, they have Boy Scouts with girls in it now. I'm not really sure what
they have
means.
Some girls only Boy Scout troops.
Yeah, girls only Boy Scout troops, whatever the hell that means. But
they're called Scouts now, right? Not
just
Boy
Scouts. Yeah, but I mean,
they still have Girl Scouts.
There was rights involved in that because you had to learn how to start a fire with 2 matches. We did winter camping. Like I remember we did winter survival camping, and that was cold. Like I don't know how cold it was, but it was cold as fuck. Like we were all just like sardines and just like had every layer on us, and we were all freezing through it the night. It was cold, and we went through all these trials as part of that. I don't know. We were like 10, 11, 12, 13, definitely before high school, but young. And, they push you through moments like that. So that's another opportunity for boys to, I don't know what it's like today if there's girls in the Scouts, but, it's an opportunity today where, guys can experience it. I mean, like the outdoors, I think, is a place where boys need to immerse themselves. And then you learn how to fish. Then you learn how to catch shit and scavenge and climb and, be resourceful and learn about their environment around them. But I mean, most kids today, I remember when I was 16, we got this program here in Ontario, and I think it was called the Ontario Ranger Program at the time. I think they changed the name to Junior Ranger Program. There's some people watching this right now that might resonate with this, but they basically took a bunch of city kids, they put them on a train, and they shoved them up north, and we got off at a town called Folliet, Ontario, which I don't even think had an intersection. I think it had a stop sign in the middle of the fucking town. It was so small. And then we got on a van or a bus for about another hour, and we went to another town called Chapleau, which had a street light. It was slightly bigger. And then we went for another 45 minutes into the deep woods. And it was a camp. And our job was to cut weevils out of, forestry trees, clear up portage trails, all kinds of stuff, man. Like it was probably the best 2 months of my summer, but there was a lot of kids there that were like downtown city Toronto kids, some of them from single mother homes, and they didn't know what the fuck to do. Like I remember 2 of them ran away the first night because they were so frightened with the environment. They actually took off in the middle of the night, easily an hour away, and that's a drive. They didn't even know where the hell they were going. And these kids got lost just because they wigged out being dropped into that environment. They didn't know what to do. But I mean, a lot of the other guys were okay. But
they failed the test. They weren't ready, right?
First night, man, it was like jailbreak. They were out of there.
And that's how you could tell they probably didn't have a very good discerning father.
Yeah. We got a super chat here from our friend Amos. He says, what would you recommend for families that want to create a unique tradition to introduce as a rite of passage for their boys?
I'll tell you one that I heard last year, and I was trying to think today who I heard this from. I just can't remember who told me this, but it was somebody I was talking to on Twitter or something. And what he did with his kid that was 13, 14 years old is he lives in a city, and he took his kid to another part of the city and dropped him off. And he prepared him for that. He taught him how
That
to read
sounds
street
amazing.
signs and so forth, and he taught him how to navigate. But he dropped his kid off and said, "All right, get yourself home."
How old was the kid?
I think he was early teens.
So same story for Richard Branson. It's in his book, Losing My Virginity, but I think
Really?
he was like 7.
Okay.
And on the way home to their house, he got dropped off at the outskirts of the village by a river, and he had to find his way home.
It's a
But
good challenge.
yeah. I got another super chat here from Juan. He said, muscle cars too. There's something about driving roaring straight pipe Mustang. I have a motorcycle, Mustang, El Camino, and I love them. Yeah, there's something raw about muscle cars. You got to love them.
Yeah.
I would say for Amos's question, I would say think about the values that you would want to portray and find ways to implement them in there. Like one of the more popular rites of passage that still goes on in some tribal communities is, have you ever seen the land jump is what they call it? It's where they essentially build a really rickety building out of sticks that's about 8 stories tall, and they jump off it with a bungee cord, but the bungee cord doesn't bungee. It's just a rope.
Oh, it breaks.
Yeah, it breaks or it snaps your feet or something like that.
Breaks
You
your
jump
back.
off, and it's a leap of faith because that tribe says boldness and courage is the primary virtue, right?
And don't you, as a kid, don't you also have to do the math to figure out that your tower is tall enough, but not so tall that you're giving yourself a cop out?
Yeah. I think in some places you have to pick your own rope too.
Yeah, so you have to make sure that
figure out your rope and how close you can get to there without dying.
right. So you want to get close to the ground without hitting the ground, and that's the math challenge in this.
Yeah,
little rite of
and that's
passage.
like to prove you've got the cojones, right, to be a man in that tribe.
So I'm thinking that might not fly in 2020 in America. I don't know.
Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Well, the root is, what is the virtues you want to promote to your family and farther, right? So this is a little side thing, but it applies. Is that I always hate when people use the term patriarchy as a nuclear family, and that's never been the definition of it for history. The patriarchal is almost like that old money, long form, generational patriarchy, right? So you're not working for your kids, you're working for your great grandkids. You know what I mean? And that's always been how the term patriarchy's been used for time until the baby boomers in the early 1900s, where it's all just go to your factory job, come back to your 9 to 5 to your nuclear family. All before that, all patriarchy was generational. So I say that so if you're creating a rite of passage for your family, think about what is the value you want for your kids and your grandkids and your great grandkids and your great grandkids. Like, what do you want your last name, like Amos Joseph? What do you want Joseph to stand for when they hear about the Josephs? And if your family has never done that before and your dad never did it, okay, you start, right? If you want a family and you want to go down that route, what do you want your line to go through? Like when you hear the word Trump, everybody knows what the word Trump is, no matter which Trump you're talking about, right? So like when you say Rich Cooper, what does Cooper mean to be a Cooper, right? Or what does it mean to be a Smith, Sean Smith? What does it mean to be a Joseph, Amos Joseph? What does it mean to be a Dresser for me, right? And you got to build that genealogy and that virtue for your family. So you want your rite of passage to deal with that. Like if you're really big on nature and survival and being competent on your own and being independent, take them for go for a week-long camping trip and bring minimal supplies. Like do a week-long camping trip with 3 days of food. Right? Do something like that. It's got to be hard. You got to isolate yourself. You got to find some kind of transformational experience. If you wanted to be more communal, you can invite, all other, patriarchal things. If the grandpa's still around and he's solid, or the uncle or anything like that, whoever you think could also be a good role model. I know I have some friends where they did it with their kids, but they used their football coaches were involved in it as well. Or they essentially give them like a mini Olympics out like in a different state with like no money. It was interesting, but and I thought that was interesting because they just cared a lot about like pushing past your goals essentially, and like pushing yourself past where you think you're done.
Can you bypass your rites of passage as a man?
Yeah, you can live your whole life as a boy. It's going to suck, and you're going to complain a lot, and you're not going to contribute much to the world. But yeah, go for it.
So, I mean, do those things go hand in hand? So I'm going to ask you this question because I've met guys that were proficient killers, like military, Navy SEAL type of dudes, done phenomenal things, but they'll get completely derailed as a man when it comes to a woman for something like, I don't know, as simple as one-itis, for example.
Yes.
Is that because they never had that rite of passage as a man?
Yeah, I would say,
Like they never matured to that point?
yeah, a lot of transformations, like we were talking about in these rites of passage, are usually two specific things. That's what I was telling Amos, like, make sure your rites of passage is based on the values you want to bring at that time. Or like Sean, when you were talking about you got in a fight, you got some kind of transformational thought process, but that didn't cover your whole life. That just covered, fear of others or insecurity around others, right? That didn't cure your whole life for everything, you know? And so there's always some type of transformational thing that happens, and it doesn't always apply to your whole life.
But I mean, like, isn't going to war a rite of passage? Isn't becoming a killer a rite of passage? But does it have to happen by a certain age for you to really to achieve that right? To have that level of accomplishment. I mean, for example, let's say a guy joins the military in his early 20s, is deployed, he has a number of successful tours. He goes through the ranks, he becomes a Navy SEAL sort of thing by his late 20s, early 30s. But he never went through any of that stuff as a teen. And then in his 30s, he's completely derailed in his life with a bad choice with a woman. As Sean would say, you bring the wrong woman in your life, she can kind of throw it for a loop. I mean, does it have to happen by a certain age? Like, does a rite of passage have to happen by 13? Does it have to happen by 18? Does it have to happen somewhere before a certain age?
I would say, I mean, just looking at the audience for the red pill and the manosphere, like we get a lot of guys that come in here zeroed out in their 40s and 50s.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? And I mean, the people who've read the Rational Male and a lot of the, the staple books and had their thinking changed through those experiences, like, they don't really have an age limit. You know what I mean? You can always learn anytime. It's pretty easy to argue that, yeah, if you read it in your 20, you probably have a way different life than when you read it when you're 50. But I mean, those are all still kind of those isolation and transformations, even though it might be more mental than physical. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't say it's specifically an age range. You can, like I said before, I've met some 16-year-old men and I've met some 60-year-old boys, and it's all about how much they've exposed themselves and left their comfort zone and were able to learn and transform from those.
Yeah, it's so strange that happens, man. I had a conversation the other day with this guy that I think he was mid 50s, around 54, 55, and it's like, I don't know, he had the hots for some girl that he connected with on Facebook, and got to meet her, thought he was going to rekindle a lost love from elementary school, and it's like she ghosted him, and he's like, why would she do that? And I felt like I was talking to a boy, not to disparage, or to belittle what he was feeling at that time, but it's like, you're a grown ass man. Like, this isn't a question that we should be asking. We should be asking bigger questions than this right now. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying, you've got some older gentlemen that are not quite men yet. I mean, they act as men, they live as men, they pay taxes as men, of course, but it's like they're still stuck in like that boyhood sort of mentality. I don't know if it's because there was an absence of a rite of passage, or maybe because he was raised in a single mother household, but it's bizarre.
Yeah.
Does the clinical world talk about this sort of stuff, Sean?
Psychologists? No.
Yeah.
No, they don't talk about rites of passage and what men need.
No,
men are toxic.
Oh, damn, man.
Right. Yeah, I actually looked up the APA definition of rites of passage, and it's like 3 sentences and it said no relevant articles under it. So it's like, thanks, guys. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if here's a question.
Yeah, I think you can have several.
I was just about to say this.
Yeah.
Something like this. So John B asked, can a man have more than one rite of passage? So I was thinking, Conk, when you're talking about, these older societies where men or boys would train for an event, and then they would complete that event, and then there's a marked transformation at that event. It seems like modern Western society, that men who end up pretty resourceful and resilient in life, they don't necessarily have that one event, but there's a series of events that take place over years. And so,
Yeah, and you also got to realize a lot of this we're talking about is modern examples, because the modern world, doesn't have any rites of passage. So a lot of it is, winging it or by accident through series of phases, right? I think when we're looking more at like that tribal research, like the graph we're talking about, they kind of got it all at once, right? Because the tribal unit, the they're not leaving 9 to 5, right? And if they are, they're usually bringing the son with, to go teach how to hunt. And then they go kick him out and tell him to hunt on his own for a while and then comes back an adult, right?
What about this question? He's saying, how do you handle when you're not sure if you're going to be part of your son's life? Like, how do you, I guess the question is, you want your son to experience a rite of passage, but a lot of men are separated from their kids, or they have limited access to their kids, or access that they're not completely happy with. How do you handle that as a father when you want to ensure your son experiences those trials as they grow and mature and become a man?
Yeah. Well, I'm not super familiar with like guardianship law and stuff, but how I would say is at least like if you get any amount of visitation with them, like you really got to hammer down on independent thinking, right? Don't tell them what to believe and not believe. Don't spoon-fed him anything, right? Like all rites of passage are really tests of competency in specific areas. And so you can't teach competency if they're just regurgitating what's spoon-fed, right? Even from you, even if you're giving them the best red pill, the best info they could ever have, like teach them critical thinking, teach them to ask questions and even question you. So they're getting the full spectrum on their own, right? And if they have that foundation of being able to question people, even authorities, right, including like if their mother's cuckoo or if they're, at a hyper, feminist liberal school that's force feeding them different things, they'll be able to critically analyze what's going on. And maybe you're off your rocker, you know what I mean? You might become sometime when you're senile or you're saying some crazy stuff because you're in some kind of emotional fit. And then he can know, don't follow this advice. Right. So I think if you have any amount of time with your son, you got to teach critical thinking. You got to teach being able to analyze truth from feelings, because a lot of boy influence today is female framed. Right.
I got a bullet point note here that pointed creating over consuming. Can you talk about that part a little bit more?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I know we've talked about it on this here before, and this before the train wreck, as well as other places where, by default, between the men and the women are the consumers. They're like 70 or 80% of all consumer purchases, and all of that, because they're consumption by nature, where they take and they usually give to kids or raise to kids and all of that kind of stuff, but they're not out there creating stuff. They're consuming stuff. And likewise with kids, they're all consuming, and it's whenever they meet anybody, it's what do I get out of them instead of what am I able to give out to the world, right? And so before, when I was talking about the section of men from women and children, the women and children is the consumption side where they mostly go off of what they're given, right? Rich kid or poor kid, they're both just taking what their parents are able to give. And likewise, women usually give what they're if they're following the frame of the male, if you're the strong male in the relationship, they're usually going off of what you're giving as well. But it's up to the men who separate, and they're the ones that go out into the woods, they go out into the world, they go out in the workforce, they go out into whatever, and they're the ones creating the means for those to consume, right? And so there's that separation where you essentially have to, and it reminds me of, I'm sure you guys have heard of the website called artofmanliness.com. Yeah. It's actually run by a Mormon guy. He's obviously he runs a little bit on the TradCon side, the traditional conservative side, but he has a couple gold nuggets in there, and he gets a lot of really good guest speakers on his podcast and his articles. And he had an article that was my favorite in the whole world, and I sent it to as many people as I could, and it was called "Blow Up the Relationship with Your Mother." And like that, I think is one of the biggest steps of all time, is to get out of your mother's frame, right?
So can you just summarize that? Like, how do you get out of your mother's frame? Like, if there was a 14-year-old boy watching this right now that doesn't have a dad in the house.
If he doesn't have a dad in the house, it's going to be a lot harder. You're going to have to seek out, if you do have any male teachers in your high school that are at least based or you can trust, you can look into them. You can look into mentorship if you're in a church, if you're in some of the kind of community thing, if you're in sports. I mean, I think almost all boys should be in sports. Just pick the sport that's best to your build and your tastes. But I mean, any kind of after school activity like that, whatever the teacher is or whatever the coach is, try to see if they're trustworthy and they're able to learn from. And you got to start realizing, and it's hard too, because you're not your own legal guardian until you're 18. And so you kind of got to do it a little bit more lightly, and then maybe you can drop your bomb when you're 18. But it's about realizing that like your mom is always going to want to treat you as a kid, no matter how old you are. Now, I'm sure a lot of people can relate. I'm sure you guys can relate. Do you ever go visit your mom and she starts getting back into that knack of treating you like a kid? Like they start saying you should do this or you should do that.
Yeah,
like how many years did they do that post high school? Right.
I don't think it ends. I think it's until they die, right?
Yeah. So when it's up to her, it will never happen. So it has to be up for you to happen, right? Mm-hmm. And usually you follow the guidance, like right around puberty is where most rites of passage happen and where you most start doing that. Like the bar mitzvah is at age 13 specifically. Mm-hmm. And that's when you have to be treated as an adult and do adult things in Jewish culture, right? And so now with modern times, it's a lot harder because you're not your own legal guardian until you're 18. I know you can file for it. You to try to be your own legal guardian or switch legal guardians, but I mean, I would. It's more about that emotional distance that my mom is no longer, there to give me milk, and suck teat on that emotionally or physically or whatever. I now need to start being able to prioritize, consuming for myself or creating for myself instead of just taking what she gives me.
Yeah, there's a wonderful tension between mothers and fathers when everything's working well, that the father is usually the one that's pushing the kid to embrace danger a little bit. The mother, among other things, is usually trying to protect the kid. And so when you take away that force that is trying to push the kid out into the world and get a bloody nose once in a while, and all you have is the protective force, and I feel bad for young men who are in that situation because it really then becomes incumbent on them as the 13, 14-year-old or whatever to push past that protective space and go out and find men that are going to challenge them.
Yep. Yeah, I would definitely say that for sure. I mean, there are times where I've seen a female, either the mom or the grandma, tell a kid to man up or do something.
What do they mean when they say that?
Yeah. And usually that's because the kid
usually no
is so
useful
far
advice
gone.
that follows that, though. It's just man up.
Yeah. And that's usually, like, most of the time, if it's an unhealthy female coming from an unhealthy place, it's usually because they want something and you're telling them no. But there are times where, kids are sitting in their basement, just watching porn and playing video games, eating Cheetos their whole life. Yeah. And I've seen, mothers and grandparents tell them, like, you really need to get out of the house. And when your mom or your grandma is telling you that, like, you're
but they don't know what that looks like, though. I mean, they usually don't have an example. For a lot of these kids, I mean, even if you were to look at movies, like I remember and this is going to date me, of course, like an idiot, but I remember movies growing up. You see like authentic masculine male role models like Rambo, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal, and they'd walk into a room and they'd dominate, right? There was always something on the TV. Like my dad was not an alpha male. He was not masculine, right? He was like, he was a good guy and he did the best that he could, but that was at least present. Like it was out there, right? I mean, you could have a coach for a football team or something. You could have something that would at least give you some opportunity to rip off and duplicate off that image, right? There's not a lot of that today. And if you're a kid that's got an absenteeism of that in their life, I mean, you really gotta work at it. I mean, you really gotta take ownership for it. Because I mean, their entire lives they've been probably told, you're fine the way that you are. You don't have to change anything. The right one will just come along, sort of thing. So I think it's a tough place from the begin because it's just what they've been set up for. I mean, they really haven't been set up to win. Shout out to the super chat over here, but I'll be great. Thanks, man. We got Dave here in the waiting area. He's from our brotherhood. Dave, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing good.
There you go. Yeah. So what's shaking tonight?
Well, your Rite of Passage piece is kind of intriguing because I think there's a whole spectrum of rites of passage. There's the your first fight, you hit that one. The motorcycle, I've got that check block checked. Your hot car, the military, yes, that's also in there. But I think there's a lot of things that you make as your own rite of passage. Like in shop class, I was a shop class junkie, and we went into.
They don't have those anymore, by the way. I mean, here they don't. Shop class is gone.
You might get a splinter.
Yeah, you might get a splinter and die for crying out loud. But yeah, we had shop class when I was a kid too, right?
Yeah,
you make all kinds of shit with your hands.
The scariest damn thing on the face of the planet is a table saw.
Table saw, bandsaw, yeah. It's got some big ass teeth on it. It'll mess you up.
An instructor that took blocks of wood, like maybe 1 foot square blocks of wood. He'd raise the blade on the table saw and toss the wood block onto the table saw, and that thing would go 60 miles an hour across the shop and split around the wall. That would definitely create a fear in a lot of kids, and it scared a lot of guys.
Imagine that happening now.
Yeah, we totally skipped over that. I mean, like that was a great experience for me growing up, was going to shop class. I remember we used to hop on a bus because we didn't have a shop in our school, but there was one in the same district that had one, and they'd ship all of us over to shop class, and you'd be making shit with your hands, and it had all kinds of tools in there, man. All kinds of great tools. Yeah.
Hey, check this out. Not only did I get to go to shop class through 7th and 8th and 9th grade, but I got to make in metal shop a functioning slingshot, and that was cool.
Yeah.
Nobody.
My parents still have the cutting board that I made when I was in elementary school. It hasn't fallen apart yet. I can't believe it. I still see it at their house whenever I go over.
Yeah, I've got a cold chisel that I made in foundry class, where you had to hammer that thing out and then temper it in an oil bath and some other stuff. And I've been hammering all sorts of stuff with that for the last 30 years.
So I wonder now, so what do kids in elementary school bring home in replacement for like the cutting board that I made my parents, or the mortar pestle that I made, all that stuff in shop class? Like, what are kids able to do and bring home that like at least demonstrate the skill to work with their hands?
I don't think there's an equivalent anymore.
I don't know. I think macaroni art is still going strong.
Yeah, macaroni art.
Yeah, keep the stocks in those.
Popsicle stick, sculptures where you make little bowls out of popsicle sticks glued together or some crap.
Yeah, but nothing can really replace that ability to use a saw, learning how to measure, basic safety equipment of why you should wear glasses so you don't get shot in the eye, right?
Well, my oldest daughter is dating a guy. She's cohabitating with this guy that was an ex-Marine. He grew up in a family of, his dad was a carpenter, and he's going to community college where he's learning how to use a handsaw and make things like mallets and other stuff. So it's at the, junior college level where those skills are being taught, like auto shop and welding and those kind of skills that feed directly into the job market.
Yeah, but one of the things a young man has to learn is that you can put your hands on things in the world, and you can build things, and you can create things that didn't exist before, and it involves getting a little dirty and getting some splinters and whatnot, but you can do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I think there's also a determination of, I think kind of one of my rites of passage was, we went to this new school and the instructor didn't know how to run a milling machine. We had a big Bridgeport machine in the shop, and I wanted to learn how to use it because I had a lot of my dad's college textbooks that showed these things. And I'm going, I want to learn how to use that. He didn't know how. So I went to the other two high schools in the district where they had them, talked to the instructors, learned what I needed to learn to set it up and operate it. And I went back and played with it for, several months and showed the instructor how to do it. So I was kind of one of the alpha guys in the shop because I was smart about this thing and nobody else knew anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the issues of today, right? Is when you have a fatherless home, or you have a father that's at work all day and you don't see him and he just comes home to drink beer and watch his football, right? You're not able to watch the father do his job, right? Because so much of boyhood is experiential learning, right? Sure, you can do 2 + 2 = 4 on your math book and all that stuff when you're a kid, but usually you're learning through doing stuff, like riding a bike and all of that. I don't know how many kids' books you can read about riding a bike to learn how to ride a bike, but really it just comes down to getting on there and eventually taking the training wheels off, The experiential. You might crash, you might screw up your knee, but like that's the only way most boys learn, And now that we have a fatherless home, either physically or at least emotionally, or investing wise. They're not going to have that. And like you're saying, like, oh, I don't know how to use this. I don't know how to use that. I never got taught that. Like, that's, to me, I think throughout human history, this is like an extremely new concept of not knowing this when we're younger. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing that, firearms are now completely taboo for anybody that has any kind of knowledge and skill. But I can remember my dad threw me in the car with a couple of rifles, and we went out to a rifle range, and we just shot at paper targets.
Well, they used to teach marksmanship in school, like in elementary school in North America.
Yeah.
Like it was part of the curriculum, right?
Yeah, I did that in high school. I was in junior ROTC for 4 years, and I was on the rifle team for all 4 years, where we would, in the school, we had a shooting range down in the basement, and we would go to the armory, we would get our 22s, walk downstairs before school started, and try to hit the targets.
Imagine that happening today, huh?
No.
Well, I took my daughters down to the range and ran them through some exercises with a 22 caliber rifle, and they were they were pretty potentially dangerous. You don't want to mess with my girls. They had natural talent, and they were drilling the inside of the targets, and you guys should be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So let me pose this question to you guys, because we got about 20 minutes left here, right? What top 3 things would you recommend all men do to, achieve that badge of honor, that merit badge of, like that rite of passage? Like, if you had to pick 3 things, like, what do you think they would be?
I know mine already, for sure.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Would be the first one is we talked about it a little bit before, but have some kind of sports or combat sports background. Like, make one of your hobbies have to do with physical contact, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it be, rugby, Krav Maga, jiu-jitsu, something like that. I've learned something very interesting called Armored Combat League. That's my
this is a new thing. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I've been watching that off and on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you got to find some kind of physicality, right?
Okay.
Like, there's most of our nature is a lot of buildup and release, and you can see that through feasting and fasting, through sex and ejaculation, through working out and sleeping and eating, right? A lot of things are build up and release. And like, we're living through days of a lot of chronic stress without a lot of release. And a lot of men release very well through extreme physical exertion, especially when it's competitive, right? And like, to me, like, finding some type of violent or full contact sport is super important for men to learn. Right?
Okay, so some level of competition, whether it's a sport or a combat sport. So that's number 1. So what's number 2?
Especially physically exertive. You can't be doing freaking bowling and darts. That doesn't count.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've got kind of a bias because I spent 20 years in the Army, but well,
hang on a sec, Dave. Let me come to you in a minute.
Sure.
I just want to hear Conk's other 2.
Oh,
I would say teaching some type of basic survival skill that you're good at. Either it's like hunting or fishing or camping or starting fires or something like that is really important, because like, camping trips are fun, and B, if all the poop does hit the fan, right? You don't want to be the guy, the first guy to die. Just because you don't know how to heat yourself on your first cold day with no power. You know what I mean?
It's interesting that you say that, because I was away at like a family kind of retreat last year, and we had wood and we didn't have anything to start the fire with. And I look at the window and I see a birch tree. And anybody that's camped knows that birch bark like sparks up nicely. Like, it's a very good piece of kindling to get what you got going on burning. And I'm like, let's go out and get some birch bark. And everybody's like, well, why? Like, what's that going to do? I'm like, you've never used birch bark to start a fire before? Like, do you guys live under a fucking rock? Like, where are you coming from here?
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm the only person that knew that you could use birch bark to start a fire with very, very easily. So it's like, that's a great point, right? Like, something to do outdoors, camping, fishing, like some kind of survival skill. Okay, so that's number 2. So what's number 3?
Yeah, number 3 would be, hold on, first was violence, second was that, third would be, and it kind of goes in line with all 3, is also finding a hobby that involves some type of trade or construction, right? Because that applies both to like the physicality and the survivability. Like learn some electrician skills, learn some drywall skills, learn something like that can both be monetized and also help you on your own if you do need to survive or do something on your own or some kind of DIY project, right?
So basically learn how to be useful in a house.
Yeah. Essentially, yeah. Learn how to be useful, because so much of our lives, and I'm sure you've heard it before because Joe Rogan says it all the time. Like, if everything went out, like, who knows how to make an engine? You know what I mean? Nobody knows how to make a phone, right? We have so much of our lives based on other people's knowledge, right? We all use phones and laptops every day, but if I just told you go build a phone, no idea where the hell to start. You know what I mean? So at least find something you know how to do, something that you do that. Carpentry, some kind of basic construction, something like that. Something to work with your hands that could also be productive and even monetized, anything like that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Dave, I'm going to go to you next. A quick super chat here from Achilles. Says martial arts, money matters, and how to fix a car.
Yep, solid.
Any one of those three are good. Dave, what are your top three?
I would say the ability to sit down, work in a group, and cooperate to achieve a goal. And the military does that pretty well. There are, my background is shop class. I got a degree in it, and all of those things that, how to use a hammer, how to use a saw, how to use a soldering iron, how do you read an electric circuit, how do you change a kingpin on a pickup truck front end, all those kind of things that you don't understand. Even just changing a spare tire or a flat tire is like an unappreciated skill anymore, because you just call the auto club and they come out and change your tire
Yeah,
for
most
you.
people don't need to do it anymore because either have an auto club on redial or they have run flat tires.
Right. And the ability to do things like domestic type stuff, like if you're a grown man, you should know how to at least get your crap washed, or know how to take it to the laundromat and either have pay somebody to do it or do your own stuff. And doing things like baking a cake, making spaghetti, those kind of things. Those are skills that are dying.
How to make food.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about
exactly.
basic shit here, really.
I mean,
Yeah.
my mom met my dad through the Air Force, and she was a responsible person for running mess halls on the Air Force bases. So she was in charge of that. And she gave me a wire, a 3-ring notebook with the basic recipes that I enjoyed, working with and eating at home. And those are the kind of things that I took with me to college. When I left, she kicked me out. So I knew how to iron clothes, iron a shirt, iron pants. I knew how to cook food, and I had recipes that I knew how to use. And those are, those aren't, it's like, to me, it's simple, but, to a lot of people, it's like, here, take out the can of Chef Boyardee and that's dinner. That's like, well, yeah.
Well, that's meal prep for a lot of people, is open up a can and heat it up.
Yeah. But I mean,
Right.
boiling spaghetti and frying, frying meatballs and that kind of stuff is fairly easy. And it tastes a lot better than some of that stuff in the can.
Yeah.
Got it.
And
All
like
right,
the
Sean,
theme of that
I'm
is
gonna,
competency, right?
Yeah. Sean, I'm going to come to you in a second, ask you for your top three. Dave, I'm going to let you go. Thanks for hopping on.
Sure.
See you later. Got a super chat here from High Flying, and he said, men will judge themselves against other men intellectually, economically, and by strength or violence. Sports is a rite of passage. To apply and receive pain must be experienced to know its value. Sean, what are your top three?
My top three are kill something, make something, and fight something.
I like it.
Oh yeah.
And
Kill something, make something, and fight something.
yeah. And I'm thinking about my daughter with these. My daughter's 13, and I can cover two out of the three with my daughter. The killing something is, it could be a fish. I remember my grandpa taught me how to clean fish when I was really young. I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I remember there was a little bit of lesson about let's not make this thing. This is a living thing. Let's not make it suffer all day. Let's take care of business, and we're going to use everything. We're going to take the guts and the head, and we're going to put them in the garden so things don't go to waste. And there was a little bit of a lesson there about you're not going to be here forever either, kid. And there's a connection that you develop with the world when you kill something, even if it's just something like a fish. And you're doing it intentionally, and you're doing it for a purpose. Making something, guys need to know that they can create things that didn't exist, and myself as an example, I've been making little things when I was a little kid. I was always building something. Now I make books. I make bigger things. I make things that are a little more complicated than I used to. But if you don't get that lesson as a kid that you can take things from the world and create something that didn't exist before, you're not gonna, you're going into life as a handicap. And the fight something, this could be all kinds of different ways. This is with my daughter. Let me jump back to make something. Last summer, I told her she wasn't going to sit around all summer. She had to write a book because she likes to read and she likes to write. So she had to write a book last summer, and she did it. And she was very pleased with herself. It came out pretty nice for a 13-year-old. She put together a little novella with a story in it, and the characters were kind of complex. And I don't think she thought that she could do that, but now she knows she can do that. Now she has it in her head that she can create things that didn't exist before. And then the fighting something, my daughter also goes to martial arts. She hates it, but she goes anyway because she's going to learn how to fight. But it doesn't have to be that. It can be fighting for an ideal. It can be fighting metaphorically fighting another team to win a victory. But again, you have to know that you can go up against something and you can defeat it if you need to. You don't need to be defeated by things in the world. So those are my three.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of men today that aren't violent or don't have the capacity for violence, right? They wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big one. I'm certainly going to agree on that for number one. So master combat, or at least learn combat. And you're going to get your ass kicked, and I hope you figure out how to kick somebody's ass, but learn combat. The second one, which kind of ties into combat, which would be compete. And I don't know if that's compete in combat sports or compete in a sport, but something that's physical, that gets your heart rate up, that pulls in problem-solving skills. It doesn't have to be team sport. You can compete in like a mountain bike race. Like you can compete in something that forces you to go up against others. I'm more of an introvert, and I kind of like to work by myself for the most part, so I've never really been huge on team sports. But I do like, I've always more gravitated towards things like auto racing, because it is a team sport with the pit crew and all that, but when you're behind the wheel and you're driving the car or the motorcycle, it's a different sort of thing, right? So there's that. And I'm not really sure how to define competency. But competency is a man in the sense of value, where you have the competency to create value. You have the competency skills to solve problems. I think for a lot of guys, if there's an absent male role model in their home, they've got the opportunity to do something like join the military. And it may not be the perfect solution to that, but it's a good solution to that problem. If you have an absenteeism of a masculine male role model that's got virtue. So that'd be something to consider as well. But there's a few things that you can do as a guy. You've got things within your control. So I don't want to have guys sit back and go, fuck it, my dad's not around, I can't do anything, screw this, I'm going to go and do whatever. You have to take on the responsibility as a guy to learn these skills. Pointing and sputtering is not good enough. It's not going to solve your problem. It's not going to work. You can't do that. Women can do that. Women and children can do that, but men can't. Again, like Chris Rock said in that stand-up bit, women, children, and dogs are always loved unconditionally. Men are only loved under the condition that they can do something useful. So figure out what that is for you. Go do something useful.
Yeah. Conk, let me hit you with a tough question here.
Ooh, my favorite.
Is there any rite of passage or anything that adds to a man's skill set by playing games, World of Witchcraft or whatever the hell people are playing now?
World of Witchcraft,
yeah,
World of Warcraft. Yeah.
I'm gonna say no.
No.
I want to say yes, but not to the extent of I think what I'm talking about here. But
it's nowhere near to the same extent. Listen, I've played World of Warcraft. Okay, I was a geek once. I got like a level 80. Warrior tank setup, PvP setup, all that bull. It's not the same thing, man.
Yeah.
You can have all the bragging rights of achieving those different levels of whatever, but it's not the same as beating the shit out of somebody at the dojo. It's not the same as taking the trophy home, in the football league or whatever. It's totally different thing. It doesn't even come close.
Maybe because there's nothing at stake, really. Like when
there's nothing at stake.
Hurt, but
you can't get hurt. There's no real. it's not real. It's make believe. You know, it's
well, I was going to say maybe yes because of esports, where this is actually for some places and some events and some people, this is an actual occupation, right?
for some people, it is a way for them to earn a living. Yeah,
Yeah, and so
that
the
is a
fact
way
that
to
you could be the
compete,
top
yeah.
of your field,
Yeah, you're
could
right.
in itself be a striving and a competition factor. But I mean, you know, that's also just trying to be the best desk jockey you can as well. You know, if you work a 9-to-5 corporate job, like sure, there's probably some achievement in there, but like it's never going to be the same as, you know, learning to fight. You know what I mean, or being in a super team.
You could take whoever's world class. Like, what are the leagues called? Like, what are they called? Those like electronic sports leagues?
Most of them are just called esports league, and then they're all based on different.
Esports.
Like if you're looking at MOBAs or
champion
things,
let's see
because
what an
I'm very
esports-
plugged into the Magic the Gathering pro scene. I'm not a pro myself, but I know some. So
Okay, so this is how League of Legends. Okay, so this is League of Legends. So let me share my
that's the highest paid
screen with
game.
you. So this is the highest paid game. So let's see what these guys look like. So do we think that this guy here, this is the League of Legends World Championship Super Bowl dude of the world?
Corey's dog does not like that guy.
He does not like this guy, and neither do I. None of these guys would last a day if you dropped them off in a woods with a backpack and a canoe.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we expect that.
Yeah, it's, you know, I get that maybe they get a trophy and they feel good about it, but I don't think that that's the same rite of passage as the guy that survives a tour of duty in frickin' Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that. It doesn't even come close.
But what would you feel about like making a really good business deal to get you like $800,000, right? There's probably some form of achievement in there, right? Even
Yeah,
if it's
I
not
think
physical.
that being successful in a business venture is another rite of passage for men. It certainly matures you. Like you come out of that with a lot of wounds. There's a lot of experiences, a lot of sleepless nights. There's a lot of everything from accounting issues to legal matters. I mean, you must be competent as a man to be successful at a business. So that's certainly a rite of passage in my estimation.
I mean, those League of Legends guys, they do play about 18 to 20 hours a day. So
they look
to make
like
those $1
too.
million. So
they look like they got the muscle density of somebody that plays 18 to 20 hours a day too.
yeah.
I'm pretty sure when the zombie apocalypse comes, you know, they're going to be fodder for the zombies. You know, they won't be able to outrun them, but I will.
I don't know, but they'll have the strategies though, right? They'll know all the choke points and all the right key buttons to push.
Sure.
Yeah, there might be some strategy. So there's it's getting late here, but probably can't even get into this. But the dark side of rites of passage, you know, where probably all seen this, where somebody who is in the position of creating a rite of passage for somebody younger gets a little masochistic about it. I've certainly seen that in my clinical training.
Yeah, you can also see that with like fraternities that go too far with their pledges and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, then it's not really a rite of passage. Then it turns into some kind of weird fetish.
Yeah, well, there's always something like that that's incorporated with, you know, these fraternities and these societies. Like, you know, the Freemasons have their rites of passage to graduation. I mean, most of them have something that's incorporated into that group and into that group identity. I mean, a lot of these clubs, I mean, you know, like things like there's these unofficial type of fight clubs, you know, sort of thing where you've got to basically apprentice before you become a full member. So I think
Armored Combat League. I think I might get into it. I found out Kansas City has a team.
On that note, I think that we should, we should probably wind down this broadcast because we covered a ton and we're coming up on the 90-minute mark. Before we go, guys, I just want to shout out to, let's just go do solo layout so I can head up over here on the channel sponsor because we got Tactical Soap and Beard Oil. Again, you check out with coupon code Cooper, you get 10% off, or you can just click the link pinned in the top description or go to coopersoap.com. It's all this stuff over here. It's awesome. The beard oil is amazing. And I've also got alphafit.fit on as a secondary sponsor. I'll just pop that down in the bottom. And what they do is they offer programs and supplements for guys over 35 that want to get their energy and swagger back. So check that out as well if that is of interest to you. Gentlemen, want to thank you for hopping on tonight. Next broadcast is on 3rd of February, and we're going to revisit the hypergamy discussion again because the Robert Glover, Sean Smith discussion about that 2 weeks ago wrote some interesting questions. So Sean, you're going to come back on. Rollo's going to join us. We're going to have kind of a clinical versus, practical discussion on hypergamy. And you said that you didn't see it that much in your clinical practice. Was, I think, your summary or how you distilled it? Or you just see a lot of evidence of it?
Yeah, it's a yes and no for me. I'm working on a video script, and I will try to get it out before the 3rd, so my points are out there.
Okay, so you're gonna have your talking points ready. I know Rolo's watched the episode, and he's interested in hopping on that one. So that should be a fun discussion. Corey, thanks for hopping on, man. You also had another one that you wanted to do as well. What was the other topic that you wanted to hit on?
Well, I was going to say, besides the violence one we were talking about, violence episode would be good. But the other one is the rites of passage is more of the, not just the boy becoming the man part, but that cutting from your mom's frame, I think, or cutting from your family, toxic or healthy. You got to go about it different ways. And because they have different, and I'm sure you could know that, Sean, there's different cycles of behavior when you're in a toxic family situation versus a healthy one. And, but like, I think that almost deserves its own episode of learning like how to see if your family is toxic, how to break some cycles of that, and how to be your own independent outside of those.
Yeah, I think we've kind of brushed on the whole toxic family thing at one point, so it might be worth revisiting because we're almost 50 episodes in. So
boy, I got toxic family for days, so
well,
I got all the antidotes you need.
Done. All right, so we'll schedule it in. Guys, leave a comment below. Let us know how you like this episode. If you're listening to this in podcast form, and if you're watching this live on YouTube, it is available on pretty much all your favorite podcast platforms. So give it a rating. Let us know what you think about it. And we're back again in 2 weeks. And also this Thursday, I haven't created the event yet, but this Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I've got Gonzalo Lira, also known as Coach Red Pill, hopping on for Playing to Win, because I wanted to have a conversation with him on his YouTube strategy and how he's kind of playing to win with that right now. And I think he's a interesting conversation piece. So I'm looking forward to that. So make sure you subscribe and look for that announced event when I create it. So thanks, gentlemen. We'll see you guys in the next one. All right.